And
I
Jeff?
guess I'll be the lead judge. We didn't decide that before we came in, so I'll, sorry about that. I'm Tim Moore from the Center for the Study of the American Constitution at the University of Wisconsin in Madison, Wisconsin. It's great to be here.
My name is Susan Farstone. I'm a retired patent attorney from Fort Wayne, Indiana.
My name is Lester Brooks. I teach in the history department at Anne Arundel Community College in Arnold, Maryland.
And you are?
Good morning. I'm Griffin Foskett. We're all juniors at Easthampton High School, and we're representing Easthampton, Massachusetts.
Hello, my name is Paul Seifert.
And hello, I'm Shane Cudworth, and this is our teacher, Miss Kelly Brown.
Great. Is she a decent teacher? I mean, really?
The best.
Okay. Of course she is. It's great to be here. We're going to do question number 1. What were the major disagreements among the 55 delegates during the Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia, and how were they resolved? What issues, if any, were not resolved, and what were the consequences? What changes, if any, should be made to the Constitution? You may begin.
With 55 delegates from 12 states, almost every issue discussed at Philadelphia created disagreements over philosophical ideas, the structure of government, and the details of both. From pardons to impeachments and supplementary laws to export taxes, the delegates disagreed. The most significant disagreements that threatened to disband the entire convention centered around the legislature, mainly the philosophical disagreements about the nature of representation and republicanism. Disagreements manifested themselves in structural debates about the natures of representation of the upper house, the calculation of representation in the lower house, the mode of election of both houses, taxation, the size of the legislature, and ultimately whether we would have a national or confederal government.
James Madison arrived with a fully fledged national government plan, including a bicameral legislature based on proportional representation, which was supported by the larger states. In response, William Patterson drafted the New Jersey plan with a unicameral legislature and equal representation. Small states stood behind Patterson. Despite a proposed compromise from the Connecticut delegation, things got ugly. After a lengthy speech by Luther Martin defending equal representation, the proceedings seemed so doomed that Benjamin Franklin suggested seeking divine intervention. James Wilson told the small states that the Union would be just fine without them, and both sides dug in.
Tensions continued as they neared the July 4th recess. On July 2nd, Pinckney proposed a grand committee to work over the break to find a compromise. Over the recess, Franklin hosted the Grand Committee and reintroduced a version of the Connecticut Compromise with a key addition, the House Origination Clause, which would help sway the largest states by tying taxation and appropriations to the House closest to the people. The compromise left some issues to be resolved, including the next major disagreement at the convention. What did Franklin mean by inhabitants when calculating state representation in the House? Before the compromise would barely gain approval, the debate of the proposed 3/5 compromise would carry on through mid-July. Some delegates did bring up moral questions around slavery. Historian Richard Beeman argues both Northerners and Southerners were primarily concerned about power when slavery came into play.
There were 2 different types of issues that remained unresolved. First, the issue that would have ended the convention, like slavery, and second, those that were forced to the back burner because so much time was spent on Article 1, leaving ambiguity, confusion, and the need for constitutional liquidation. For example, the Electoral College, the Impeachment Clause, and Article 3. While the Great and 3/5 Compromise can be viewed as resolutions, one can also argue that the delegates simply deferred rather than solved problems of sovereignty and slavery.
Battles between the states and national government would begin immediately over issues like the Federal Bank, the Alien and Sedition Acts, and expanding slavery. As the 19th century progressed, these disputes centered on slavery, and within 60 years, the Civil War would tear the country apart and take 600,000 lives to resolve the issues of sovereignty and slavery. Additionally, many of the powers and checks devised by the Constitution would need to be worked out through what Madison called in Federalist 37, constitutional liquidation. These issues like implied powers, judicial review, and presidential prerogatives would be carved out through the living Constitution, beginning with the Marshall Court as seen in Marbury and McCulloch, and seen more recently with DHS and the University of California.
There are several ways that the Constitution should be changed today, including changes like instituting term limits, ending the Electoral College, implementing ranked choice voting, overturning Citizens United, prohibiting partisan gerrymandering, or making the amendment process less cumbersome. While there are other issues like civil discourse and polarization in Congress that seem to be pulling the country apart, they are not easily resolvable through a constitutional amendment. Thank you, and we're ready for your questions.
All right, I'll start out. Is that okay, guys?
Yep.
Okay. Should we not give the delegates at Philadelphia, I think we should be uglier with them because they didn't do what they were supposed to do. Are you with me on that, or are you going to push back on me on that?
I would 100% agree. I think the entire reason that the delegates went, to the convention was to amend the Articles of Confederation. That's what they were approved to do. But when they went there and Rhode Island didn't show up, they couldn't change the articles. So Madison drafted the Virginia Plan and started creating an entire new government, which really is wrong. They really weren't supposed to do that. And I think while what came out was the Constitution that was a better system, I do not think it was right of them to ignore what they were expressly told to do.
I agree with Shane. One big issue that they discussed that they didn't really solve was the problem of slavery. The only thing that they did was say that under taxation and representation in the lower house, that 3/5 of an enslaved person would be counted for both. They didn't really decide whether slavery was going to be banned or not, which was decided after the Civil War with the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments.
Thank you.
Let me ask this. You talked about the disagreement over a national government versus local or state government, and you brought in the Alien and Sedition Act. Can you go back to that? I can't remember which one of you were brought that up.
It was me.
Okay. Explain that a little bit more.
Okay. So
You were talking about Alien and Sedition Act.
yes. Would you like me to explain what those are, or?
Yes.
Okay, so the Alien Act, I believe, allowed them to, it changed the regulations having to do with citizenship and people coming to the country, I believe.
Mhm.
And the Sedition Act made it so that the government could make it so that people couldn't, it took away basically the freedom of press and didn't allow people to criticize the government, especially during wartime.
And what was the fallout from that?
With the Sedition Act, I believe that it was repealed in the, I believe it was repealed in 1920.
Okay.
Adding on to what Paul said, I think the main fallout was that it showed that the government was willing to take unreasonable and unconstitutional actions to enforce its power over the people during wartime. And that was one of the many wrongs under the Adams administration, that he overtook his own, he basically extended his powers past the constitutional limits by limiting the free speech of the people and silencing people from speaking out against the government.
Well,
Okay.
I don't stay on that. You mentioned various parts that were really put on the back burner. Would you say that the executive power was an example of one of those?
Yes, I would say that the executive power was definitely put on the back burner. They were very vague with what its powers are, and they now rely a lot on implied powers. So they kind of just hope that people would figure out what their powers are in the future.
I agree with my partner. The term limit problem with the presidential branch was a big issue. They set the they decided that a 4-year term would be good, but they never decided that how many term limits the president branch would have. George Washington set a precedent that it should be a 2-term limit, but that was never implied into the Constitution until the 22nd Amendment.
Do you think the convention should have used the secrecy restriction?
I don't think that they should have used that secrecy restriction. I think one thing that they wanted out of the government was to have government transparency. But when they were creating their form of government, they kept it hidden from people. And so I think if they truly trusted that the people would accept their form of government and sort of accept the new constitution, they would have allowed the people to know what they were doing at this convention. But I think they were just hiding it because that's not what they were instructed to do. And so they were hiding it until it was finished so that they wouldn't have any obstruction from the people.
Doesn't ratification, I'm going to push back a little bit, and this just isn't to you, Shane. Doesn't ratification kind of run counter to your argument or not?
I don't think it does. I think with the process of ratification, yes, they wanted the people's consent, but actually looking at what they went through with in Pennsylvania, they rushed ratification through Pennsylvania and didn't allow anti-federalists on the other side of Pennsylvania to basically show their discontent with the Constitution. You also see the examples with Rhode Island being strong-armed into ratification. How are they agreeing to the Constitution if Washington threatened them?
Let's go back to this, the issue of slavery, and elaborate on the compromise. They decided to compromise in favor of union. Did they make a mistake? Why not just resolve the issue then and save the country all of the controversies that came in generations to come?
They really couldn't make any decisions on slavery because the southern states wouldn't have agreed to the Constitution if they did. It was a very large part of their economy, and they couldn't really agree to a Constitution if it took it away.
Go ahead.
I agree with Paul, and I think that because of the economic reliance that the South had on slavery, that it would have been almost impossible for them to create a constitution without slavery and include the South. But thinking about it, we would have had a better, I feel like it would have, I think if the Southern states would have not consented and stayed out, we would have probably had a ban on slavery in the Constitution sooner. And I think that necessarily having the Southern states was their main concern with keeping slavery. I think they wanted to have an agreement and to have all of the colonies and all of the states together, and which is why they sort of played devil's advocate and agreed to the 3/5 compromise.
Let's go to key delegates. You can't answer with Washington. Other than Washington, who do you consider to be pivotal at Philadelphia?
I think one obvious answer is Madison, and sort of coming up with the Virginia plan and sort of creating a structure that a lot of the Constitution was based off of. He came to the meeting prepared, which is one of the reasons why a lot of his views were seen and sort of heard.
Oh, really? Oh, man. Oh, man. Well, thank you.
All right.
Lester, Susan, you want to start out with feedback?
I'll go ahead and start out. I liked your introduction. You gave us sort of like a story of the Constitutional Convention. And you were hitting a number of the issues where you opened. Nearly all the issues led to disagreement. And then you proceeded to talk about legislation, representation, slavery, states, small states, large states. So I like that. In your responses, you also saw the issue of power as well. You were talking about slavery and the Northerners and Southerners and that whole idea of power. And that's something that has to be recognized. You brought up Luther Martin and equal representation. Yeah, and being from Maryland, you know, yeah. Oh yeah, that's true. It's drinking. But that was good. I like the way that you helped each other out. You added to each other's thoughts. So a good job.
Yeah, I too really appreciated that opening. Down, I liked the Luther Martin quote, but there were other quotes in with Benjamin Franklin with divine intervention, and the historian Beeman's quote. And And I just felt like I really rushed on the end on things that you would change in or prefer to change in. We'd like to have gone into that a little bit more, especially the gerrymandering and all that, but there's only so much time, so much you can squeeze into 4 minutes. And you did a good job of squeezing it in and getting a lot of support with that. So I like the fact that one thing though I enjoy especially is hearing that the federal government issues on the federal government, starting really at the beginning, including the Alien and Sedition Act, which is right at the beginning, up through the Civil War. You could have actually brought it up through modern era. So that was nice. I enjoyed it. I especially enjoyed that you mentioned that Rhode Island was indeed strong-armed into ratifying this Constitution with an army ready to attack. So nicely done.
Yeah, and the fact that you mentioned the rush job in Pennsylvania, I think that demonstrates an understanding of some of the historical information. You know, you did two really, really thought-provoking things. One of the thought-provoking things, and these are good things, constitutional liquidation. I mean, you know, and connecting it to the Federalist 37, I think that's interesting. And then tying it with the second thing is tying it to the notion of they punt and expect the implied powers problem to be solved by other people. And you know, and maybe the courts, that's their sole gig is to sort out the ineffectiveness of Philadelphia. So that's a very thought-provoking statement, and that demonstrates that you've thought about the weaknesses of a text. There's going to be implied powers because, you know, they want to get home, frankly. So let's have somebody else do the constitutional liquidation because we're going to punt. So that's a thought-provoking idea that a lot of your argumentation is centered around. So I thought that was really good. Now, Paul, don't worry about the Alien Sedition Act because Shane saved your bacon on that one.
Yeah.
You know, because now, having said that, I think the reason that we wanted to know that because it honestly wasn't crystal clear in the 4 minutes. Mm-hmm. And in your follow-ups, Shane basically saying it's a power problem that shows up early. Mm-hmm. I guess I didn't hear that clearly in the 4 minutes, but you got there. So don't worry about that. I just like going forward, think through every sentence. Is it clear? And so I think Lester appropriately asked about that because I was a little fuzzy too. So don't worry about that, Paul. Shane rides in on a white horse on that. But yeah, on the whole, this is very, I mean, you understand some dynamics during the Grand Committee. That's pretty deep understanding of Philadelphia. So I appreciated this presentation very much so. And you do have a great teacher. So.
Thank you. Thank you all.